You need to leave, ma'am. Our units aren't for people like you. That sentence, delivered with icy precision by a 20-something receptionist with perfectly ironed blonde hair, slammed harder than any door Alicia Monroe had ever had shut in her face. In 5 seconds, she had been judged, dismissed, and expelled. Not for what she said or did, but for how she looked. No one recognized her. No one suspected that the tired-looking black woman in worn sneakers and a weather jacket was, in fact, the CEO of Monroe Realty Holdings, the very company that owned the building she'd just been kicked out of. Alicia stood still for a moment, as if absorbing the weight of the insult, then nodded politely and turned away without a word. The receptionist rolled her eyes and went back to her phone. That moment was exactly what Alicia had anticipated and feared. For weeks, anonymous complaints had landed on her desk. Reports of racism, of working-class renters being ignored, of Black and Latino clients being told there were no availabilities, only for white clients to be shown luxury listings minutes later. Each time she brought it up to the Midtown branch manager, she was met with explanations. We're selective. It's a misunderstanding. They didn't qualify financially. But Alicia had built this company from the ground up, starting from a single 2-bedroom rental listing in a forgotten corner of Atlanta. She knew exactly what discrimination looked like because she had lived it. So instead of launching an internal audit or warning the staff, she decided on something far more direct. She removed her designer heels, let her natural curls frizz slightly, and traded her structured blazer for an old coat. She walked in, not as a boss, but as a test. And her staff failed. Miserably. The office she entered was bright and sleek, its walls lined with photos of smiling agents holding sold signs in front of pristine homes. But behind the polish, Alicia felt the chill of contempt. She had entered quietly, standing patiently in line, while a white man ahead of her was immediately greeted and ushered to a consultant's desk. When her turn came, the receptionist glanced at her shoes, hesitated, and asked flatly, "Do you have an appointment?" Alicia replied gently that she was looking to rent a 1-bedroom apartment nearby. The receptionist didn't look up. She simply said, "We don't have anything available right now," then turned to her phone. The lie was immediate and obvious. Alicia didn't push. She knew this game. It was the same script she'd faced years ago when she tried to rent her first apartment while holding 2 jobs and attending night school. The look of disdain, the assumed lack of worth, it all came flooding back. She stepped outside into the morning air, pulled out her phone, and clicked stop on the hidden camera nestled inside her pendant necklace. She had everything she needed. Back in her penthouse suite later that evening, Alicia watched the footage on a loop. She analyzed not just the words, but the expressions, the posture, the dismissive body language. Her assistant, already aware of her undercover plan, sat beside her silently, jaw tightening with every passing minute. Alicia said nothing. Her silence spoke volumes. By 10 p.m., the footage was edited, time-stamped, and compiled into a presentation. By midnight, her legal team was briefed, and by dawn, she was back in full power mode. Tailored navy pantsuit, gold watch, leather heels clicking with conviction. When she entered the Midtown branch the next morning, the same receptionist who had dismissed her blinked in stunned confusion. Her posture straightened. She fumbled to greet Alicia, clearly not yet connecting the dots. A nearby agent recognized her immediately and stood frozen, as if seeing a ghost. Alicia didn't say a word. She walked through the office slowly, absorbing the sudden shift in energy. Agents scrambled to tidy their desks. Phones were hung up mid-call. A manager emerged from the hallway, face pale. Alicia turned and said evenly, "Conference room, everyone." Within 10 minutes, every employee was seated, eyes flickering nervously. Some recognized her, some didn't. All of them knew something was wrong. Alicia stood at the head of the table and opened her laptop. Without a word, she hit play. The screen lit up with the receptionist's face, the one currently sitting 2 seats away from her. Her voice rang out clearly. "Our units aren't for people like you." No one breathed. Alicia let the video roll, the receptionist looking disgusted, a white client being ushered in moments later. A Latino couple being told, "We're all booked this month." before a white woman is offered a tour. Scene after scene of exclusion, double standards, and thinly veiled bias. When the video ended, Alicia closed the laptop, looked around the room, and said, "I gave you this brand. I gave you my name. And this is what you turned it into?" The silence was suffocating, and Alicia hadn't even begun. Alicia stood tall at the head of the long glass table, her presence commanding, her silence deafening. The employees seated before her, once smug and confident in their daily routines, now sat like children caught red-handed. Some avoided her gaze entirely, others darted glances toward their colleagues, as if silently begging for a shared defense, but none dared speak first. Alicia let the tension linger. Her eyes moved slowly across each face, committing every expression to memory. She had once believed in second chances. She had built her company on that belief, hiring people from overlooked backgrounds, encouraging empathy and inclusion, and fostering a corporate culture that was meant to uplift. But what she saw now was a reflection of something far more insidious. Privilege left unchecked, attitudes left unchallenged, and a blatant betrayal of everything she stood for. Finally, she spoke, her voice even but cold. "Yesterday, I came to this office as a stranger. I wore no badge, no name tag, no armor of wealth or title. And what I received in return was silence, exclusion, and humiliation." Her words struck like thunder in a windless room. The receptionist, pale and stiff, opened her mouth as if to speak, but Alicia held up a hand, silencing her. "No explanations, no justifications. I don't need your versions of what happened. I have the truth." She tapped her laptop again, pulling up another video. This one showing a young black couple entering the office and being told to come back next week because we're overbooked. The video then cut to a white client entering just 15 minutes later, being given a full tour of available listings. There was no audio commentary, no added music, just raw footage that screamed volumes louder than any accusation. Alicia looked back at the group. What you didn't know is that every branch of this company has been under silent review for months. Secret shoppers, hidden cameras, feedback audits. And this branch consistently failed. You didn't just ignore people. You profiled them. You made decisions not based on income or eligibility, but on names, accents, clothing, and skin color. A male manager shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped tightly. "Miss Monroe, if I may?" Alicia's voice sliced through his attempt like a blade. "You may not." The room froze again. "This company carries my name, my blood, sweat, and the sacrifices of a little black girl who used to sleep in a 2-bedroom apartment with 6 relatives. I built this empire to ensure people like me never had to feel invisible again. And what did you do with it? You turned it into a gatekeeping machine." A woman near the end of the table began to cry softly. Alicia glanced at her, but her expression remained unmoved. "I've watched every clip. I've read every complaint. Do you think they were just making it up? That those people imagined the way you looked through them? The way you offered nothing but the bare minimum? If that." The silence was suffocating now, as if oxygen had been sucked from the air. Alicia continued. "Discrimination doesn't always look like slurs or violence. Sometimes it looks like politeness with no sincerity, smiles with no service. We're full when you're not. It looks like someone walking out your door knowing they were never seen, never heard, never mattered." She turned to the screen again and clicked on a still image, a frame showing the receptionist staring blankly at Alicia during their first encounter. "This was me, yesterday, standing in the lobby, and not one of you recognized me. Not one of you asked if I needed help. Not one of you thought twice about the way you dismissed me." Gasps swept the room as full realization dawned. The woman they had turned away, judged, and ignored was the very woman who signed their paychecks. Alicia paused for effect, letting the weight of the moment land hard. "This meeting isn't a warning, it's a reckoning." She opened a folder on the table, filled with printed documents, complaints, transcripts, and evaluation forms from secret visits. "Every person in this room has failed this company. You failed its values. You failed its mission. You failed its founder." She stepped back from the table, arms crossed. Effective immediately. Your employment is terminated. All of you. Chaos erupted. A few stood up, voices rising with protests and desperate pleas. One shouted, "This isn't fair!" Another yelled, "I've been here 10 years." But Alicia's voice cut through again, sharp and final. "And that's 10 years too long if this is how you treat people." Security guards, already briefed and waiting outside, stepped into the room. One by one, the staff were escorted out, stunned and silent. Some tried to speak, some cried, some glared at Alicia with disbelief, but none could undo what had already been done. When the last employee was gone, Alicia closed her laptop, exhaled deeply, and stood alone in the quiet room. For a long time, she said nothing, just stared at the empty chairs once filled by people who had betrayed her values. Then she whispered almost to herself, "Never again." She picked up her phone, dialed her assistant, and said calmly, "Call HR. We're rebuilding from scratch, and this time we hire people who see the invisible." With that, she walked out of the room, heels echoing off the tile floor, and left behind the ghosts of a company she thought she knew. The hallway outside the conference room felt colder than usual, though the thermostat hadn't changed. Alicia walked through it slowly, her heels echoing off the walls, past framed awards and Employee of the Month portraits that now felt like relics of a lie. She stopped briefly in front of one such frame, a smiling blonde agent holding a massive gold key in front of a sold sign. Just yesterday, that same agent had rolled her eyes when Alicia had asked where the restroom was. No words, just a flick of the wrist and a look that made her feel like she didn't belong in her own building. Alicia stared at that photo for a moment, then reached up and took the frame down. She didn't slam it. She simply laid it flat on a nearby counter and continued walking. Her executive assistant, Maya, was already waiting in the lobby, holding a thick stack of manila folders and looking like she hadn't slept. Alicia gave a single nod. No words were needed between them. Maya fell in step beside her as they exited the branch building and walked toward the waiting black SUV. "All exit paperwork is being processed," Maya said softly. "It's already deactivated their access. Security escorted everyone out peacefully." No incidents. Alicia gave a quiet, almost imperceptible nod. "Any press?" she asked. "Nothing yet," Maya replied. "We briefed PR to keep a soft lid until you're ready to release a statement." Alicia stopped before stepping into the SUV. "We will release it," she said, "but not a statement. A story. A truth. With footage." Maya looked surprised, but not shocked. She had worked with Alicia long enough to know that silence for her was rarely passive. It was power. Waiting. In the backseat of the SUV, Alicia pulled out her tablet and reviewed a list of upcoming meetings. It was time to face the board. Though she technically had the authority to fire an entire branch staff unilaterally, as founder and majority stakeholder, she still knew the conversation with the board of directors would be a battlefield. Some of them, she suspected, had turned blind eyes to these complaints for months, not out of malice but out of convenience. After all, Midtown had been performing well financially. It was, on paper, a success story. High closing rates, low overhead, minimal legal incidents. What the board didn't see was the invisible cost, the brand erosion, the ethical collapse, the betrayal of community trust. Alicia wasn't just saving face. She was saving the soul of her company. At headquarters, the atmosphere was buzzing. Rumors had already begun to circulate. Staff passed glances, whispered theories, but no one approached Alicia directly. Her reputation preceded her, not as a tyrant, but as a leader who acted without hesitation once a decision was made, and today she had made several. Inside the executive conference suite, the board members were already seated. Most had arrived early, anticipating drama. Some were supportive allies, others opportunists, and a few were dangerously quiet. Alicia entered without pause, placed her tablet on the table, and said simply, "You've all read the summary. Here's the rest." She connected her device to the central screen, and just as she had with her Midtown team, played the hidden camera footage. The room remained mostly silent, save for a few sharp inhales. The board president, a silver-haired man named Ellis, leaned forward, resting his chin on steepled fingers. When the video ended, Alicia let the silence stretch again. She had learned early on that silence made the truth louder. "This happened in our building," she said. "Our employees, our name, our brand." Ellis cleared his throat. "You understand this opens us to lawsuits, right? Terminations without due process?" "Due process was yesterday," Alicia cut in. "What they received was grace they didn't extend to a single client." Another board member, Janice Huasoromi, spoke. "Are you planning to release this to the public?" Alicia nodded. "Unedited, with a formal statement and an apology, not for optics, but because it's the right thing to do." "Won't that hurt investor confidence?" someone murmured. Alicia turned to them. "What hurts investor confidence more? Losing short-term goodwill or being outed later for sweeping racism under the rug?" No one responded. She continued, "We rebuild this branch from scratch. We review every office, every manager. We retrain, requalify, rehumanize this company. Or we let it rot and die slowly from the inside." Janice nodded slowly. Ellis sighed, rubbing his temples. But no one opposed her. The vote was unanimous. Alicia stood, adjusted her blazer, and left the room without another word. She had what she needed. That night, Alicia sat alone in her study, watching the city skyline blur through the rain-streaked window. She sipped tea, but her thoughts were fire. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from a woman named Linda Carver, an elderly black client who had been denied a rental at Midtown 3 weeks ago. "Miss Monroe, I just wanted to say thank you. I don't know what happened, but I feel like someone finally listened." Alicia stared at the message. It was short, but it hit her harder than any boardroom speech. She typed back, "I did listen, and I'll keep listening." Then, without hesitation, she forwarded the entire message to the PR team and instructed them to begin the campaign with Linda's story. Not just as a symbol, but as a reminder. This company wasn't built for profit. It was built to protect dignity. And starting tomorrow, that mission would no longer be a slogan. It would be a movement. The next morning, Alicia arrived at the Midtown branch once more, but this time not to confront or dismantle. Today, she came to build. The building felt eerily quiet now, stripped of the chatter, the fake smiles, and the subtle arrogance that had once filled its halls. It was almost peaceful, like a garden freshly cleared of weeds, waiting for something new to grow. As she stepped into the lobby, a small group of people stood waiting for her. Not former employees or executives, but applicants, real ones this time. They had responded to a private overnight posting sent to a very specific list of community centers, advocacy groups, and educational organizations. It hadn't been on LinkedIn. It hadn't gone to Ivy League grads or polished brokers. It had gone to people who knew struggle, who had been overlooked, who understood what it meant to treat others with respect because they had long been denied it themselves. Alicia walked straight to them, shook hands one by one, and welcomed each of them inside personally. There were 10 of them, diverse in age, race, and experience. One was a former housing rights advocate, another a bilingual mother of 3 who had navigated the rental market without formal education. One man had been homeless for 2 years before getting certified as a property consultant. They weren't conventional hires, but that was the point. Alicia led them into the same conference room where she had fired the entire staff just 48 hours earlier. But today there was no tension, just open notebooks, fresh coffee, and the kind of raw nervous energy that came from being given a real chance. She stood before them and spoke, not as a CEO behind a podium, but as a woman who had walked through fire. "I didn't bring you here because of your resumes," she began. "I brought you here because of your lived experience. Because this office forgot how to see people. And I believe you haven't." She told them what had happened. Not the sanitized version, but the truth, the discrimination, the ignorance, the way her own staff had corrupted the values she held sacred. She didn't sugarcoat the challenge ahead. "We're not just opening doors," she said. "We're rebuilding trust, community by community, client by client." The group listened in silence, then one woman raised her hand. Her name was Esperanza, and she had once been evicted unjustly with her newborn daughter because of a landlord's prejudice. Her voice trembled. Are we allowed to share our own stories with clients? Alicia smiled, the first real smile she'd shown all week. I expect you to. That afternoon, Alicia stayed as each new trainee shadowed volunteers from Monroe Realty's community outreach team. They visited shelters, affordable housing forums, and even a neighborhood church. It wasn't about sales. It was about understanding. Building connections. One of the trainees, Jamal, a soft-spoken young man with a history of juvenile incarceration, turned to Alicia after speaking with a disabled veteran who had been denied housing 3 times. You think we can actually change how people see this place? He asked. Alicia looked at the crumbling perception of Midtown's past and then at the group of determined faces now inside its walls. Not just how they see it, she said, how they feel in it. That evening, back at headquarters, her media team presented the first draft of the public video campaign. It began with Linda Carver's message and then shifted to footage from Alicia's hidden camera. Shown in full, no dramatic music, just reality. The silence, the dismissive words, the contrast in treatment. Then came Alicia's voice, narrating what happened, not from a place of rage, but of responsibility. Leadership, she said in the voiceover, isn't about titles. It's about showing up when it's hardest and saying, not on my watch. When the team asked if she wanted to add a call to action, Alicia shook her head. The video is the call. If they care, they'll know what to do. The campaign launched quietly the next morning, posted across the company's website and social channels with a single caption, "We failed, and we're fixing it." Within hours, messages flooded in. Some were angry, accusing Alicia of overreach. Others were moved to tears. Most were simply grateful that someone in power had finally used it for good. Community leaders called to offer support. Housing advocates asked to collaborate. Even former clients who had once sworn never to work with Monroe Realty again reached out to ask if things were truly changing. The most powerful message came from a single mother named Latoya, who sent a photo of her 2 children smiling outside their new apartment. The caption read, "Thank you for cleaning house. You made room for us." Alicia printed that photo and pinned it above her desk, not as decoration, but as direction. That night, as she walked the halls of her company headquarters, she paused outside the employee lounge where laughter echoed. It was the new trainees, now interns, swapping stories, debating rental tips, and practicing fair housing scenarios like improv theater. One of them spotted Alicia and called out, "You want to join us?" She laughed and waved. Next time. She kept walking, past the lounge, past the offices, to the glass balcony overlooking the city. For a long time she stood there, watching the lights flicker on across the skyline, and thought about what it meant to burn down something you built. It hurt. It required courage. But sometimes the only way to stay true to your vision is to tear down the parts that betrayed it. Alicia closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "Now we begin." 3 days after the firings, the buzz surrounding Monroe Realty's Midtown branch had reached nearly every corner of the real estate industry. News outlets were starting to pick up rumors. Anonymous posts on job forums hinted at mass terminations. Employee switches from other branches exchanged nervous texts, some genuinely confused, others privately grateful someone had finally done something. But Alicia Monroe wasn't thinking about any of that. She was sitting alone in her personal office, quiet, minimalist, and flooded with morning light, reviewing every piece of documentation from the Midtown branch. Not the financials, those she already knew. She was studying staff evaluations, internal emails, Slack logs, client survey forms. She wasn't hunting for gossip or scapegoats. She was trying to understand where it had gone wrong, not just with Midtown, but with her own leadership. She had built Monroe Realty to be a beacon of integrity, a place where people of all backgrounds could feel seen and served with dignity. It was supposed to be different, yet somehow, without her realizing it, one of her most successful branches had become a gatekeeper of the very systems she had once vowed to break. As she read through the survey results, a pattern emerged. Clients who were white or affluent reported a smooth, friendly, and attentive experience. But those who marked their race as Black, Latino, or Native American, or who noted an annual income under a certain threshold, often included remarks like rushed, dismissive, patronizing, or ignored. Many of them didn't even bother to finish the survey. Alicia set the tablet down and looked out the window. The city below bustled with movement. Shoppers, families, delivery drivers, young professionals juggling coffees and phones. Among them were people just like her 20 years ago. Exhausted, hopeful, invisible. She remembered being treated like a burden during apartment tours, being asked repeatedly about her income. Even after providing pay stubs, being told, this might not be the right neighborhood for you. And now somehow, those same experiences had been recreated under her own roof. That afternoon, Alicia scheduled a one-on-one with her company's Director of Training and Development, Rhea Thomas, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a background in anti-bias education. Rhea entered Alicia's office briskly, holding a thick folder and a concerned expression. I've been waiting for this, she said without sitting down. Alicia gestured to the seat across from her. Then we both waited too long. Rhea opened the folder and began flipping through printed materials, training protocols, onboarding checklists, culture audits. The systems are in place, she said. We teach the language, we run the modules, but culture doesn't shift from slideshows. It shifts from enforcement, from lived modeling, and frankly, the Midtown manager hasn't been modeling anything except plausible deniability. Alicia leaned forward. So what do we fix first? Not what, Rhea said. Hutatuk. She slid a document across the table, a proposed short list of interim managers and team leads, many of whom came from community housing backgrounds or had worked with organizations focused on tenant rights. They may not have sales records like the old staff, she added, but they know how to treat people. Alicia nodded, absorbing every name. We're not chasing quarterly bonuses anymore, she said. We're chasing trust. Rhea smiled for the first time. Then you're going to need one more thing. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded paper flyer, something that looked like it had been Xeroxed 100 times. It read, Tenants deserve dignity. Know your rights. This was made by a housing advocacy group based 2 blocks from Midtown, Rhea explained. They've been coaching people who got turned away by our staff. Alicia's jaw tightened, and we never even spoke to them. Rhea nodded. Not once? Alicia picked up the flyer and studied the names at the bottom. She would call every single one. Not to save face, not for optics, but because true repair starts with listening to the people who had been shouting all along. The next day, Alicia and Rhea walked into a modest community center with peeling paint and a waiting area filled with mismatched chairs. It smelled of coffee and old books, and it felt more honest than any marble-floored office she had ever set foot in. A young receptionist looked up and did a double-take. Wait, are you? Alicia gave a small smile. Yes, I'm Alicia Monroe, and I'm here to listen. The meeting that followed wasn't easy. She sat across from 5 members of the advocacy group, all of whom had horror stories to share. Tenants rejected over accents, applicants asked for unnecessary documentation, disabled clients being told elevators weren't reliable, so maybe try elsewhere. Alicia didn't defend, she didn't explain, she simply listened. When it ended, she stood and said, I can't undo what happened, but I can open the doors you should have walked through years ago. And she meant it. She invited them to serve as consultants in the redesign of Monroe Realty's client intake process. She gave them unrestricted access to review training scripts. She offered them the opportunity to lead seminars, not just for Midtown, but for every branch. Rhea pulled Alicia aside as they left. You know this will rattle people, she said. Good, Alicia replied. They need to be rattled. We all do. That evening, Alicia stood in front of a group of her regional managers, some wide-eyed, some skeptical, as she announced the new partnership. If you're afraid of being called out, she said, you should be, because calling out isn't the problem. The silence that let this happen is. She ended the meeting with a quiet, firm challenge. Let's be better than the brochures. Let's be better than Midtown was. A few managers clapped. Some didn't. Alicia didn't care. She had stopped measuring loyalty in applause. She now measured it in action. That night, as she walked home under the fading streetlights, Alicia passed by one of her own for lease signs. It hung perfectly straight, illuminated by the building's porch light, but something about it felt empty. She pulled out her phone and typed a note to herself. Redesign the signage, make it say, "All are welcome," and mean it this time. Alicia arrived at the Midtown branch early the following week, not in a suit or heels, but in a navy blue sweater, black slacks, and soft-soled flats. The building felt different now, quiet, stripped of pretense. The old staff were gone, and in their place the office echoed with possibility. She had spent the last 4 days in meetings, not with executives, but with new hires, outreach partners, and Ria's training team. She'd asked questions, taken notes, listened deeply. The plan wasn't just to replace bad employees, it was to rebuild a system from the ground up. When she stepped into the newly painted community room, the 10 new team members stood waiting in a half circle. They weren't polished brokers or top sales performers. They were activists, renters turned realtors, former housing discrimination victims, and neighborhood advocates. Alicia scanned their faces and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "Thank you for being here," she began, her voice clear and grounded. "You were chosen not because of what you've sold, but because of what you've survived. Because you understand what it means to be overlooked, unheard, dismissed, and because you know how to make sure others never feel that way again." The room was silent, except for the sound of pens scribbling in notebooks. Alicia gestured to the whiteboard behind her. It read, "Client first, always. Equity over efficiency. Integrity above quotas." "This isn't a slogan," she said. "It's the spine of how we move forward." That day's training wasn't about contracts or closing deals. It was about empathy, identity, language, and power. Ria facilitated the session, walking the group through role plays where someone entered the office without an appointment, spoke limited English, or presented as someone who might not look the part. One trainee, a soft-spoken young woman named Malia, paused mid-exercise. "I think I'm afraid I'll get it wrong," she admitted. Alicia smiled. "You will. We all will. But the difference between someone doing harm and someone building change is how they respond when they mess up." Later, they practiced scripts that replaced phrases like, "You're not qualified," with, "Let's see what options we can explore together." They learned to pause when someone hesitated, to ask gently if they'd like to bring a translator, to recognize signs of housing trauma, to avoid questions rooted in class assumptions. In between sessions, Alicia met privately with a few former clients who had once been turned away at this very branch. Some were hesitant to return. Others arrived holding copies of the apology statement Monroe Realty had posted. One woman, Aisha, walked in with her teenage son. She had been told last year there were no family-friendly units available, even though listings were posted online that same day. Alicia met them herself. She sat with Aisha and her son for over an hour, asking not just about their experience, but about what they wanted from a housing provider. "We want someone who sees us," Aisha said, "not just our credit score." That sentence stayed with Alicia all day. She wrote it down in her notebook and circled it. By evening, she gathered the new staff again. They had just completed a workshop on accessibility. "Tomorrow," she said, "we begin welcoming back every single client who was dismissed, denied, or discouraged. You won't be asking for business. You'll be offering space. You'll be saying, 'We see you, and we're starting over.'" The next morning, Alicia personally unlocked the front door of the branch for the first time since the scandal. It felt symbolic, like cracking open something sealed and stagnant. The new staff stood behind the counter, nervous but ready. Flyers lined the waiting area. "Everyone deserves a home. Discrimination stops here." Community members trickled in slowly at first. A retired teacher looking for a one-bedroom. A family of 4 who had previously been told to check back in 6 months. A college student who had heard about the story on TikTok and wanted to know if it was really true. The new team treated each person with care. They made tea, they asked about comfort, they handed out pamphlets not just on Monroe Realty's listings, but on renters' rights and fair housing laws. Alicia watched from her office window. She saw Malia gently walk a client through a complex form, patiently explaining each section. She saw Jamal offering a brochure in Spanish. She saw smiles, not forced, but real. And then she saw her, Linda Carver, the woman whose message had started it all, standing just outside the front door, hesitant. Alicia rushed out to greet her. "Miss Carver," she said warmly, "I was hoping we'd see you again." Linda smiled cautiously. "I just came to see if you meant it." Alicia nodded. "Come inside." They walked in together. Linda was given a full tour, not of listings, but of the people. She met every new staff member. She told her story. Some took notes. Some cried. All listened. When she left, she looked Alicia in the eyes and said, "You did more than fire people. You invited us back. That matters." That afternoon, Alicia called a press conference, not at headquarters, but right there in the branch's community room. Reporters gathered around folding chairs and ring lights, expecting PR fluff. Instead, Alicia handed the mic to Linda. "This company turned me away," Linda said, "and now they turned back toward me. That's the difference." Alicia then spoke, not as a CEO defending her image, but as a woman repairing what was broken. "We got it wrong, and now we're getting it right, one person at a time." By evening, the press release had gone viral, not because of branding, but because of sincerity. Because people could see it wasn't just about damage control, it was about doing better. Alicia sat alone in the back office as the sun set, scrolling through messages. One caught her attention. It read, "I used to think companies like yours would never care. I was wrong. Thank you." She closed her laptop, stood up, and stepped back into the lobby where new clients were still being welcomed by the new team. For the first time in months, Alicia didn't feel like she was fighting to protect a legacy. She felt like she was finally living up to it. 2 weeks had passed since the Midtown branch reopened at noon, and the ripple effects across Monroe Realty were undeniable. Other branches began to receive new training modules developed in collaboration with the housing advocates Alicia had met. Posters reading, "You are welcome here," were installed in every office lobby. More importantly, employees were talking. Conversations that had once been avoided now echoed in elevators, break rooms, and morning meetings about bias, accountability, and the responsibility of privilege. But Alicia knew words alone weren't enough. She needed to see real change, measurable and visible. So she initiated a client return program, personally reaching out to dozens of former applicants who had once filed complaints. One of those calls was to Emmanuel Nwosu, a Nigerian-American tech consultant who had walked away from Monroe Realty 6 months earlier after being told, without reason, that the listings he was interested in had just gone off market. Alicia didn't just apologize. She asked him to return, not as a client, but as a speaker. When he arrived at headquarters, Emmanuel stepped into the conference room wearing a crisp blue button-down and calm confidence. He spoke without anger, but with clarity. "When I walked into your office, I didn't need pity. I needed respect. Instead, I got suspicion and avoidance. That's not just poor service. That's trauma." The room was silent. Among the attendees were Alicia's senior staff and new hires alike. Some took furious notes. Others sat frozen, ashamed. But all were listening. After Emmanuel finished, Alicia stood beside him and said, "This is not about blame. It's about learning. We can't heal what we refuse to name." That phrase, "heal what we refuse to name," became an unofficial mantra for Monroe Realty's internal shift. It was printed on the first page of every staff manual. It was etched into the wall of the training room at Midtown. And more importantly, it was put into practice. Alicia assigned Rhea to lead a new internal task force focused on ethical accountability, with monthly open-door sessions where clients and employees could safely report concerns. Anonymous surveys became regular. Every manager was now required to sit in on at least 3 client sessions per week, not to supervise but to observe and grow. Still, not everyone welcomed the transformation. At a quarterly regional meeting, a longtime branch leader from the suburbs voiced frustration. "This feels like punishment," he said. "Our numbers are up, but morale is down. People feel like they're Being watched. Alicia didn't flinch. If being watched is what it takes to treat every person with basic humanity, she said, then let them feel it. The tension in the room was sharp. But so was the truth. After the meeting, a young agent from that same suburban branch pulled Alicia aside. Her voice was low. "I'm biracial," she said. "I've worked here 3 years, and that was the first time I felt like someone in leadership said out loud what I've felt since day one." "Oh, thank you." Alicia smiled, quietly reaffirmed. Change was rarely comfortable, but it was always revealing. Meanwhile, in Midtown, the transformation was no longer just internal. Community response had exploded. Neighborhood leaders started referring clients to Monroe Realty again. A local newspaper ran a front-page piece titled, "When a Company Actually Listens," and Alicia began receiving invitations to speak on industry panels. But she declined all of them. "I'm not finished," she told Maya. "I don't want to be on stage while the foundation's still wet." Instead, she focused on stories, real ones. She instructed her team to start collecting testimonials, not for marketing but for growth. Clients like Aisha, the mother who had once been turned away, now gave glowing reviews about the way she was welcomed back. One father, a veteran named Terrence, shared how an agent helped him fill out rental assistance paperwork without judgment, without rushing. These weren't grand gestures. They were basic human acts. But in an industry where exclusion had become standard, they felt revolutionary. One evening, Alicia walked through the Midtown branch unannounced. She spotted Jamal in the waiting area, speaking gently with an elderly man who seemed confused by the lease terms. Jamal didn't rush. He sat beside the man, read each line aloud, and offered to call the man's daughter so she could be part of the conversation. Alicia watched, unnoticed, from the doorway. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of profound pride. This, she thought, is the company I wanted to build. This is the culture I thought I had, and now it's finally real. That night, Alicia sat in her apartment overlooking the city skyline. She lit a candle, as she always did, when she needed to think, and opened an old notebook. Inside were scribbles from 10 years earlier, early sketches of Monroe Realty's mission. Phrases like "no more gatekeeping," "build with dignity," and "representation matters" were underlined again and again. She had meant those words, but over time, in the pursuit of growth, they had faded. Now, with every hard conversation, every reckoning, she was writing them again. Not with a pen, but with action. Just before midnight, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Rhea. "You need to see this." It was a link to a social media post, one that had already gained thousands of shares. It featured a photo of Linda Carver standing in front of Monroe Realty, smiling, with a caption, "The woman they once ignored now trains their staff. Real change is possible." Alicia stared at the image, hand resting lightly over her chest. It wasn't validation she felt. It was clarity. This was no longer about damage control or public perception. This was about justice, one transaction at a time. And justice, she now understood, wasn't a one-time act. It was a daily decision. It was a Monday morning when Alicia received a call from a news outlet she hadn't expected. The Wall Street Ledger, one of the most conservative business publications in the country. The editor-in-chief had seen the viral story of Linda Carver and now wanted to run a full-length feature on Alicia's leadership transformation. "We think your company is redefining what a corporate reckoning looks like," the reporter said. Alicia hesitated. She didn't need the spotlight. She needed sustained change. But after a short pause, she responded with calm resolve. "I'll do it, but on one condition. I don't want the article to be about redemption. I want it to be about responsibility." When the reporter arrived at her office 2 days later, Alicia was prepared. She didn't rehearse, didn't filter. She shared everything: the complaints, the decision to go undercover, the firing, the rebuilding, the hurt, and the healing. The reporter asked, "Do you feel guilty for not knowing what was happening sooner?" Alicia answered without blinking, "Guilt is passive. I choose accountability instead." That quote ended up as the article's headline. And just like that, the national narrative shifted. No longer was the story about a scandal. It was about a movement. Alicia's inbox exploded with messages. Real estate firms from Chicago, Seattle, Atlanta, and even London reached out, asking if they could adopt her training model. Housing advocacy groups offered to partner. Public figures tweeted support. But the message that moved her most came from a janitor named Dale, who worked nights in a different Monroe Realty branch. His email read, "I never thought the person at the top would care how people like me are treated, but now I see everything changing. Thank you for setting the tone." Alicia called him directly. They spoke for 20 minutes about respect, leadership, and how change doesn't always come from the top. It flows from wherever courage begins. Meanwhile, back at Midtown, the office was thriving. Not in profit margins, but in purpose. Agents were reporting fewer no-shows, longer client visits, and more positive reviews. Local nonprofits were hosting weekly housing rights workshops in the community room. One Friday, a group of high school students on a social justice tour visited the branch. Alicia personally greeted them and sat on the carpet with them in a circle. "You're the future," she said, "and if we don't create space for your voices now, we'll lose something irreplaceable later." A young girl with braces raised her hand and asked, "What made you stop being silent?" Alicia smiled. "Because silence doesn't protect the people who need it most. It only protects the people who need to be challenged." That night, Alicia went home with a full heart. She sat in her kitchen, sipping tea, flipping through the photos Maya had printed from the student visit. One caught her attention, a close-up of a teenager pinning a sticky note on the office wall during the quanda. It read, "Justice isn't perfection, it's trying again tomorrow." Alicia pinned the note to her fridge. The next morning, she arrived at the office before anyone else. She walked room by room, touching each desk, checking the coffee station, watering the plant near the entrance that Linda had gifted. Everything felt lived in, alive. As she reached her own office, she paused at the bookshelf. Nestled between two policy binders was a framed photo of her mother, a woman who had raised 3 daughters on a nurse's salary, who had been denied a mortgage 3 times before finally buying her first home at age 52. Alicia picked up the photo and whispered, "We're making it better, Mom." Just then, Maya knocked. "There's someone here to see you," she said. Alicia followed her into the lobby, where a man stood with his arms crossed and a file tucked under one arm. He was in his late 60s, white, dressed in khakis and a faded blazer. He looked out of place, but determined. "My name's Walter," he said, "and I owe you an apology." Alicia blinked. "Have we met?" "Years ago," he said. "I was a landlord in Southside. You came to view a unit when you were fresh out of college. I told you it was already rented." "That wasn't true. I didn't think you could keep up with rent." "I didn't even give you a chance." Alicia said nothing. Walter continued. "I read about you, saw what you're doing here, and I realized I was wrong. I've carried that shame for 20 years. He handed her the file. "These are the deeds to 3 properties. I'm transferring them to a housing nonprofit you mentioned in that interview. They'll do more good in their hands than in mine." Alicia opened the file slowly, heart pounding. Everything was real. Signatures, titles, notarized forms. She looked up, unsure what to say. "I can't undo what I did," Walter said, voice cracking, "but maybe this helps make things right." Alicia nodded, her throat tight. "It does. It really does." After he left, she stood still for a long moment, file clutched to her chest. Then she walked straight to the community room and found the nonprofit leader who happened to be there prepping for a workshop. "I have something for you," she said. The woman opened the file and gasped. "Are you serious?" Alicia nodded. "Justice finds its way. Sometimes it just takes 20 years. That day, the energy in the office shifted again. Not dramatically, not loudly, but deeply. Something had come full circle. A past wound had met present healing, and the future suddenly felt wide open. Alicia stood before the large touchscreen in the executive conference room, not presenting a pitch deck or quarterly report, but instead showcasing a timeline of transformation. Behind her on the screen were photos of the new Midtown team, testimonials from clients, and a live graph tracking satisfaction scores since the relaunch. numbers that had doubled in just 1 month. This isn't about profit, she told the senior leadership team. It's about proving that justice and business are not opposites. They are partners. Around the table, department heads nodded, some skeptically, others with visible conviction. It had taken time, but most of the top brass had begun to understand that Alicia Monroe's mission wasn't a public relations stunt. It was a cultural shift. Still, with progress came pressure. Investors had begun asking questions. Shareholders wanted assurances that the reforms wouldn't hurt the bottom line. Alicia had anticipated this, so she scheduled a town hall, a full live stream, open to all Monroe Realty staff, partners, clients, and even the public. The room was packed. Thousands tuned in virtually. Alicia walked onto the stage, not with slides or marketing buzzwords, but with a single story. She recounted the day she walked into Midtown disguised and was told, "We don't show to people like you." Gasps echoed. Some looked visibly uncomfortable. Others leaned in, their faces heavy with realization. That moment wasn't an exception, Alicia said. It was a mirror, and we can't change what we won't face. She spoke about accountability, her decision to fire the entire staff, and how justice had since reshaped the office. One conversation, one policy, one apology at a time. This isn't about canceling anyone, she continued. It's about calling everyone back to our shared humanity. When the town hall ended, Alicia walked backstage and sank into a chair, finally allowing herself to exhale. Maya was already there, holding a tablet. "Comments are flying in," she said. "Mostly support, a few less friendly." Alicia raised an eyebrow. "What else is new?" she replied with a soft laugh. But Maya wasn't smiling. "There's one you need to see." She handed her the screen. It was a direct message from an anonymous account. "My sister worked at Midtown. She got fired, but after hearing your story, she started volunteering at a housing shelter. Says you opened her eyes. Thought you should know." Alicia stared at the message for a long moment. Then quietly she whispered, "That's what justice looks like." In the following weeks, Alicia found herself invited to more speaking engagements than she could accept. She turned most of them down. She didn't want Monroe Realty to become a spectacle. She wanted it to stay grounded, rooted in the daily grind of building back trust. But there was one invitation she couldn't ignore: the National Fair Housing Conference. She'd attended it 10 years earlier as an audience member. Now she was asked to deliver the keynote. When she walked on stage, the crowd gave a standing ovation, but Alicia raised her hands and gently motioned for them to sit. "I didn't come here for applause," she began. "I came here to admit that even with the best intentions, we can still fail people. And if we have the courage, we can still come back for them." She spoke not of perfection, but persistence, of grace, of systems, of the invisible people who deserve to be seen. She ended with a story about Linda, the woman who was once ignored and now trained new hires. "She didn't ask for revenge. She asked for respect. That's the kind of leadership we need." Afterward, dozens lined up to speak with her. But Alicia only remembered one, a teenage girl with a Monroe Realty notebook clutched to her chest. "I want to be like you," she said, tears in her eyes. "Not famous, just fair." Alicia smiled. "Then you're already ahead of most." That night, Alicia sat by her window, the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass. She thought about the teenage girl, about Linda, about Walter, about herself, about the house her mother had worked a lifetime to buy. She remembered the promise she had made as a young girl, kneeling in that cramped bedroom under a leaky roof, that one day she would build something better. And she had. Not just a company, not just an office, but a culture, a commitment, a call to action, a model of repair. Not perfect, but brave. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a photo sent by Jamal. It showed one of the new staff, Malia, handing a lease to a single mom and her daughter, both smiling, both crying. The caption read, "Another door opened, thanks to you." Alicia saved the photo to her favorites and typed one word in reply: "Us." 6 months had passed since Alicia Monroe walked into her own office undercover and walked out with a mission to dismantle everything that no longer served justice. The Midtown branch had since become a case study in transformation, not just for real estate professionals, but for businesses across industries. News anchors called it a quiet revolution. Activist groups cited it in presentations on corporate accountability. College students referenced Monroe Realty in essays on ethical leadership. But Alicia didn't let the attention distract her. For her, the work was only beginning. One crisp autumn morning, she arrived at the Midtown location before sunrise. The building was silent, the glass still fogged by the night's chill. She stepped inside, flicked on the lights, and moved from desk to desk, straightening chairs, filling the coffee pot, tidying brochures, not because she had to, but because she wanted every new staffer walking in to feel dignity from the moment they stepped into the space. By 8 a.m., the office was buzzing. Jamal was helping a couple finalize paperwork. Malia was showing listings to a woman wearing a hijab, carefully avoiding assumptions and patiently clarifying every step. Alicia watched from her office door, a quiet smile on her face. Then a knock. It was Maya holding a stack of envelopes. "Today's community feedback," she said. Alicia reached for them and opened the first one. It was handwritten on lined paper. "I used to be afraid to walk into places like this. Now I feel like I belong." She placed it next to her keyboard and kept reading. A thank you note from a local shelter. A photo of a family standing proudly in front of their new home, 3 generations smiling under a Monroe Realty banner. A drawing from a child, a crayon sketch of a house with the words, "Miss Alicia helped us." Alicia's eyes welled, and she let the tears come. They weren't for guilt or regret or even pride. They were for the girl she used to be, the one who had once sat on a broken couch in a one-bedroom apartment and promised herself that one day she would change how the system worked. And now she had. That afternoon, Monroe Realty hosted its first internal summit, a gathering of every branch manager, new and old. Instead of renting a conference center, Alicia chose a high school auditorium in the very neighborhood where she had grown up. She took the stage, microphone in hand, dressed not in a power suit, but in jeans and a navy cardigan, the same color she'd worn that day she went undercover. "I'm not here as your boss today," she began. "I'm here as a black woman who believed in fairness before she believed in her own voice." She told them about the lies we inherit, about the policies that sound neutral but carry bias, about how silence is not safety, it's permission. When I walked into that office 6 months ago, I saw who we really were, and it hurt. But when I walked in today, I saw who we've become, and it healed something I didn't know was still broken. She opened the floor to questions, and one man stood, Michael, a white manager from a suburban branch. "I'll be honest," he said. "At first I resisted everything. I thought it was overblown, that we weren't part of the problem. But then I listened, and I realized I've been a gatekeeper too, quietly, without knowing it. I want to thank you for not giving up on us." Alicia stepped down from the stage and hugged him. The room erupted in applause. After the summit, Alicia walked alone through the high school's empty halls. She passed lockers that hadn't changed in decades, posters for science fairs, reminders to be kind. She stopped at a door with a peeling plaque, "Miss Dyer History." She remembered that room. Miss Dyer was the first person who ever called her a leader, the first to say, "You can do more than survive, you can shape the world." Alicia wiped her eyes, smiled, and took a photo of the door. That night, back in her apartment, she stood on the balcony watching the city breathe beneath her feet. Cars rushed by, lights blinked. Somewhere a child was probably falling asleep under a new roof because of her. She thought about the staff she fired, the people she hired, the people who left angry, the ones who stayed and grew. And she felt something deeper than satisfaction. She felt alignment. The next morning, Alicia walked into Midtown not as a hero, not as a symbol, but as someone who understood that justice isn't a destination. It's a practice, a commitment, a verb. She greeted every client, shook every hand, made time for every story. because she knew now that true leadership isn't about being above. It's about being among, being willing, being honest, being the first to change and the last to quit. As she poured herself a cup of coffee and stepped into her office, she paused at the wall beside her desk. There, framed in silver, was a photo of Linda Carver, arms crossed, smiling, standing proudly in front of the office she once feared. Underneath it were 5 words Alicia had etched herself: "You are seen, you matter." And just like that, another day of justice began.